Have you ever wondered if there's like a best age? You know, a time when life is just happier? Well, for a long time, science seemed to have a really clear answer. But as we're about to find out, that entire story has been completely turned on its head. So let's explore the changing shape of happiness.
Seriously, think about it for a second. Is it that boundless freedom of being young, the wisdom you get in old age, or is it somewhere in the middle? This isn't just some late-night philosophical question. It's something economists and psychologists have been trying to map for decades. You know, for the longest time, data from all over the world pointed to this remarkably consistent pattern in how our satisfaction with life changes over time. It became known as the happiness U-curve.
The shape is actually super simple and pretty intuitive. Just picture a graph of your life. It starts up high, dips way down in the middle, and then it curves right back up again. This model basically suggested that our lives have three distinct acts when it comes to well-being. Okay, so Act 1, historically, was the peak. People between 16 and 19 years old consistently reported some of the highest levels of life satisfaction. This was seen as, the high point of potential and freedom, right before the realities of adult life really kick in. And then comes the famous dip. The data always show that people in their mid-40s to late 50s hit the absolute bottom of this curve. This is the period we often call the midlife crisis, but as we're about to see, it's a bit more complicated than just that. But, and this is the hopeful part, the story doesn't end in that trough. After bottoming out, the curve shoots back up, and I mean significantly. In fact, this age group, 65 to 74, historically reported the highest average happiness of all, reaching this new, incredible peak of contentment later in life.
So, what is really going on in that midlife dip, right? Why do so many people report their lowest levels of well-being during these specific years? Well, the research points to a kind of perfect storm of pressure.
It's really less of a single crisis and more of a squeeze. Researchers have a term for it: peak chronic role strain. Think about it. You're often at the absolute height of your career demands, while you're also raising your own kids, and you might be caring for your aging parents at the same time. And on top of all that, there's this psychological gap, the one between the life you thought you'd have and the one you actually do. It's a lot. But here's what's really fascinating. When researchers strip away all those external things, like they control for income, marital status, employment, the lowest point of well-being actually shows up even earlier, right around age 43. This suggests there might be something intrinsic, maybe even biological, a dip that's hardwired into us that then gets piled on by all those real-world pressures. All right, let's move to the other side of that curve and see how things build back up to that second peak. What explains this powerful rebound in happiness that people feel in their 60s and 70s?
Well, a really powerful psychological theory called Socioemotional Selectivity Theory, or SST for short, gives us the key. It basically says that when we sense our time is becoming more finite, our whole motivation system shifts. We stop focusing so much on planning and acquiring things for the future, and we start prioritizing what makes us feel good, emotionally, right here and now.
And this isn't just an abstract idea. It leads to real, concrete changes. Older adults get way more selective about who they spend their time with. They actually strategically prune their social networks. They cut out the draining or superficial relationships to invest more deeply in the ones that are truly meaningful and emotionally rewarding.
And this shows so brilliantly how the very quality of happiness changes. For younger adults, happiness is often about these high-energy emotions like excitement and joy, but it's also way more volatile. For older adults, happiness becomes more about stable, calm emotions like contentment and serenity. They gain this remarkable amount of emotional control.
So you see the picture, right? This U-shaped map seemed totally complete. Youth starts high, midlife dips down, and old age bounces back with wisdom. It was a really neat, satisfying story. But in just the last decade, that entire story has been blown up. Yeah, recent data, especially from affluent Western nations, has uncovered a stunning and, frankly, a deeply concerning trend. The familiar U-curve we all knew, it's vanishing, but not for the reason you might think. Okay, just look at this data from the United States. If you rank countries by the happiness of people aged 60 and over, the U.S. comes in at a very respectable 10th place in the world. But now, get this. When you rank countries by the happiness of people under 30, the U.S. plummets all the way down to 62nd. The young are now the least happy age group. The whole curve has flipped on its head.
And this quote from the report just hits the nail on the head. The midlife dip isn't going away because middle-aged people are suddenly doing great. No, it's vanishing because young people are starting their adult lives not from a peak of happiness, but from a much, much lower baseline of well-being and anxiety.
So why is this happening? Well, researchers are pointing to this new cocktail of pressures that's pretty unique to this generation. We're talking about the psychological toll of social media, crushing economic insecurity from things like debt and housing costs, huge anxiety about global threats, and a real decline in the kind of strong, real-world social circles that protect us from stress.
What all of this means is that we need a completely new map to understand the journey of happiness today. That simple U-shape, it just doesn't really apply anymore, especially not in high-income countries.
This table gives us a much more nuanced view. For young adults, the goal is still novelty and new experiences, but now it's paired with high anxiety and, in places like the US and UK, a sharply declining happiness trend. Midlife is still that low point, the peak of complexity and stress. And later life, well, that's still defined by a search for contentment, and it remains a period of pretty high well-being.
So, the bottom line is this. There is no longer one single story of happiness that applies to everyone across a lifetime. The path to well-being is now profoundly shaped by the specific social, economic, and digital world that a generation happens to grow up in.
And this leaves us with a really critical question for the future. I mean, if that classic U-curve is broken, and young people are starting their adult lives from such a low point, what will their happiness curve even look like? Will they rebound? Or are we witnessing the beginning of an entirely new and maybe much more worrying life story?